welcome to the Thursday, June 20th, 2019 edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Also, welcome to the dead of summer officially. Coaches are on vacation, much-deserved vacations in parts unknown. Great time for us at TigerIllustrated.com to sort of stretch our legs with some different endeavors. One of those just started yesterday, Wednesday, ranking the top 25 players on the roster. Man, when you get down to it, it's a lot harder than it sounds just because it's so much talent. We started with number 25, Sean Pollard, but boy, when you get to 1 through 5, trying to establish some sort of hierarchy between all that filthy talent on offense and defense, quite a task. This is going to go for a few weeks, and part 2 coming up today with the number 24 player on the roster, TigerIllustrated.com. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. They have been with us from the very beginning. Blake Smith has been a good friend of mine for years, dating back to the days when he taught a law class at Clemson with Terry Don Phillips. Also, Brooke Archenhold, major Clemson fans. The forte of their firm, which is at 15 Washington Park in Greenville, is medical negligence. They represent patients and their families in medical negligence actions. Also handle all sorts of other personal injury litigation. Free consultations. Parham Smith and Archenhold. Give them a call, 864-990-4581, or go to parhamlaw.com. A warm welcome to the newest supporter of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff, 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market. All right, let's get to our interview with Marc Dopher, who spent 10 years in the upstate sports broadcasting market, covering a lot of interesting times for both Clemson and South Carolina football. Marc is now out of the business, so very interested to hear what he's doing, what it's like, and also hear some anecdotes from his lengthy time, about a decade, covering college football in the Palmetto State. All right, here we go. Enjoy. Joined by Marc Dopher, good friend, I guess former colleague in the press box. That kind of sounds strange to even say. How you doing, Marc?
I'm doing really well. So it's been it's been a while since I've talked sports kind of on this level, but I'm doing great. And you're right. Sometimes it's hard to believe just because anybody who has been on any sort of beat knows that we all see each other so much that often I would see people like you more than I would see my own coworkers because we were just always in the same place at the same time, and over the last couple of years that got to be kind of a wider and wider circle as we were in places like Phoenix and Miami and Tampa, and it was but certainly a lot of fun, but glad to be on with you.
Okay, just for the folks who don't know, just from a time perspective, when did you make the transition from YFF to the real world, I guess we could say?
Yeah, so I started at WYFF in January of 2008 and left shortly after Clemson's. I guess I left the day that Clemson lost to Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. I believe that was Clemson Alabama 3. So basically, give or take 2 or 3 weeks, covered sports here in the upstate for a decade.
And what are you doing now?
So I work for a company called Entercom, and the easiest way to describe it is it's probably one of the radio stations that you're used to listening to, B93, 93.3 The Planet, ESPN Upstate, 106.3 WORD, and I sell ad time and digital marketing products from that. So I switched from the talent side to the sales side.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind, just to give an idea of exactly what you're doing, sort of in layman's terms, like, what did you do today?
So what did I do today?
This is a Wednesday, just for where it's been recorded on a Wednesday.
Yeah. So today I had a meeting pretty much first thing in the morning with a new client to kind of feel out what they might need marketing wise and kind of what products we might have to fit it. Went back to my office with a client that I just signed yesterday to work on writing their commercials and making sure that we're ready to go because those commercials start tomorrow, which would be Thursday. And then making sure that those got produced, and then I ran out the door because I had to go to Spartanburg for another meeting, and then I had a pitch at a construction company at 3. So that's kind of every day, all day, what I do. A lot of meetings, trying to find new clients and really just trying to help local businesses grow their business.
What was the transition like? The immediate transition?
The immediate transition, and this may sound kind of funny to people, but really the most awkward part was just having every weekend off with my wife, because we've just never been used to that. I mean, my wife and I met when I was in TV down in Texas, and I worked nights and weekends and holidays. And then when I moved here, I worked nights and weekends and holidays. So we had never had a lifestyle where we both, and my wife works a 9 to 5 for Milliken. And so we had never experienced what it was like to know that we had every single weekend off, every holiday off. We would both be home at 5 or 5:30. So that was a kind of a weird transition, I think more so for her, because she was used to just me not being around on Saturdays and just kind of doing whatever she wanted. And now it was like, well, what are we doing? And so it was a little bit weird. On the work side, it wasn't as hard a transition as I thought it would be. I've always loved meeting people. So, and that's essentially what I do now. And I love, forming lasting relationships with people and kind of finding out what makes them tick. And, I think that's why, I was pretty much friends with everybody on virtually every beat I ever worked, just because you always get one-on-one time with people. And over time, you really start to learn, not just about who they work for or what they do or what their style is, but more, do they have children? Where do they like to go on vacation? What do they think of this specific situation? And I know you and I had several conversations, not necessarily about content for one of my stories or one of your stories, but just kind of a, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think is going to happen? Or, what did you think about this? I mean, it was, a deeper conversation than, hey, I'm working on this story. What do you think about this? So it's, and my current job is very much the same, just kind of forming those relationships that you hope will be long lasting.
During fall, I guess this past fall, your first fall, I guess, again, in the real world where you don't have anything to do on the weekends and you're working 9 to 5 during the week, did you want to sit around and watch football all day? And if so, could you sit around and watch football all day?
Yeah, so I'm very, very lucky because my wife, who went to Texas A&M, is a huge college football fan. So literally we start on a Saturday at 9 a.m. with College Game Day. We watch all of it. We may sprint to the grocery store or whatever, halfway through the show, but we literally every Saturday mapped out the games that we wanted to watch, when they were coming on, and just sort of made a plan for ourselves. And so, I mean, it's not uncommon at my house for college football to be watched from noon until, midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, depending on, how good the Pac-12 after dark game is. But my wife loves to watch that much that's what we did. And I certainly got a number of offers from people to go to games. But the thing that I found is I love watching so much that I don't want to give up an entire day to go to one game. So that's what we did. And, I'd fire up the grill and we'd cook all day. And it was a lot of fun. And it was a fantastic fall. I had looked forward to it so much because I just wanted to sit on my couch and watch.
I guess before you came to Greenville, you were in Texas and you met your now wife there, correct?
Yes, I did.
And what part, tell me, was that your first job out of college?
Yeah, so I had done some work for some stations in Missouri, a little bit here and there, and then that was my first real professional job, which was at KRGV, which is the ABC affiliate down in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, all the way on the border. maybe a better frame of reference is South Padre Island was in my market. So I worked there, and it was, and there, I mean, high school football just drove the bus. I mean, we were 4 hours south of San Antonio, and we showed Spurs games, but we didn't really go to them. We showed, the Texas Longhorns. The Longhorns won a national championship while I was living in Texas, and we showed all that stuff, but we were so far away that we didn't go. And really what drove the bus was high school football. And it was crazy because you would, I'd go out on one of my days off and people would be asking me, what high school game are you covering this week? And, is Billy Garza or Bradley Stevens, all that. And then when I got here, not that people didn't love high school football, but the conversation here rotates around the college game. So those were the question changed when I got here, because people would say, they'd say, oh, what game are you covering this weekend? And I'd be like, oh, I've got South Carolina, Florida down in the swamp, or, I've got to go with Clemson to Georgia Tech. And so it was interesting how it changed. And like I said, not that high school football isn't a big deal here, but I never covered a game in Texas that had fewer than 10,000 people.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was, and the difference, people ask me this quite a bit. They'd say, well, what's the difference? I mean, why are the crowds so huge? And I think the biggest difference is that here, if your son or your nephew plays high school football, you go to the games while they're playing. That makes sense. Or if your daughter's a cheerleader. Well, in Texas, if your son played 30 years ago, you're still a season ticket holder at, Ed Couch Elsa or Mac High or Harlingen High or Harlingen South. So that's where the difference was that people just, towns shut down. And I think here, the example that I would give, there are two of them. One of them might surprise you, but actually there are three. Burns and Gaffney are kind of like, they've kind of got that Texas feel to them. And the one that I think has the biggest Texas feel to it is actually Woodruff. Woodruff, every home game, 10 deep on the fence. Especially if it's a big game. And if you want that Texas feel, town shuts down, only thing that matters, for my money, it was always Woodruff High.
So when you're trying to decide whether to come here, what's your notion or impression of South Carolina in general, upstate South Carolina in particular?
Yeah, well, I kind of had a little bit of a head start because my twin sister lived in Greenville when I got the call here. And I'd always heard that Greenville was a fantastic place to live. But I'll be honest, I had to look up what was here. Like, well, what am I going to be covering? And then when I saw what it was and I saw basically the geography, that there was so much that was so close here, this is what I wanted to come do. I wanted to come cover big time college football. And then you mix in the fact that I knew that we were going to be covering the Masters. As you know, I'm a huge golf nut. And so the opportunity to do that, it just looked like a great, and to cover ACC basketball, it just looked like a great fit. And I wasn't here. The first 2 days that I was here, I covered, I think it was Boston College at Clemson. It was January, so it was basketball season. Boston College at Clemson, and then I think Florida at South Carolina. Those were the first 2 days I was here. And that's when Florida was, I think, the two-time defending national champions in basketball. So, like, right away, I'm right into it. I'm like, this is fantastic. Because, like I said, high school drove the bus where I was at in Texas.
So you get here early 2008. Tommy Bowden is preparing for what was supposed to be a big year for Clemson. They were ranked in the top 10 going into that season. Steve Spurrier, I guess, is preparing for his fourth year in Columbia. What's your recollection of sort of what you were thinking and going through as that monumental season from Clemson's perspective goes, with the Tigers falling apart under Tommy and then Dabo taking over? What do you remember most about that time?
Yeah, well, really, and what a crazy year, because I remember going into that season, and if people, and I know Tiger fans don't want to remember this, but that's the season that Clemson opened in the Georgia Dome, top 10 team versus Nick Saban in Alabama, and I just remember being so jacked up because that was the first major college football game I ever covered. And I knew I was going for months. And I just remember people being so excited, and why not? Colin Harper had played really well the year before. You had, the thunder and lightning of James Davis and CJ Spiller. There was a lot to look, and I forget who was the wide receiver.
Aaron Kelly.
Aaron Kelly. Yeah. And I just remember the buzz going into that. And then you get down to the Georgia game, and I'm not trying to tick anybody off, but Clemson was never in that game. They just got manhandled. And then it just kind of got worse from there. And, as far as that was a team that they couldn't pick up a 4th and 1. And so there was a lot of frustration. And then you go up to Wake Forest, and on a Thursday nighter, and I loved going to Wake Forest because it was such an easy place to cover a game because it was never full. It's a nice facility. But that game was terrible. It was probably the worst college football game I ever covered. And then the next day I'm out. I had just joined at Holly Tree Country Club, and I was out playing golf. And I think I was, at the time I wasn't a very good player, but I think I was like 1 or 2 over after 6. And I get a call from Jeff Hart, and he said, Tommy Bowden just got fired. That's what he said. We know what, fired, quit. Nobody really knows. But he said, Tommy Bowden just got fired. We got to go to Clemson. So, I remember rushing out there, and I honestly, the thing that I remember that was just the most bizarre part of this was that Tommy pulled up. I don't know if you remember this, but he pulled up in like in a early 90s Mustang or like a late 90s Mustang. It was really bizarre. I'm like, well, whose car is this? It seemed really weird because I got a shot of him, either coming or going. I can't remember which one. So that happens. They introduced Dabo. I still remember how fresh-faced Dabo looked because I think he was 38 at the time. And who can forget the, we've got pocket 10s and I'm going all in, everything I got. Which obviously coined the phrase all in. And you went, let's see what happens, where we go from here. And you knew the guy had a magnetic personality. I don't think anybody saw this coming. Not that Clemson couldn't win a national championship within 10 years under Dabo, but multiple national titles in contention every single year. Truly an elite program in college football. I don't know at that point if anybody saw this coming, but it's funny, people talk about building a statue of Dabo in Clemson, which today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, he certainly deserves. And to me, the shot of Dabo that I'll never forget is him, walking into Death Valley against Georgia Tech that first Saturday, kissing the rock and pointing to the sky. And it was just, it's ingrained in my mind. And again, not that I knew that all this was coming, but it's that moment where you go, a new era has begun.
I can explain whose Mustang that was. That was so Donald Hemel, Truck, otherwise known as Truck, from Louisiana, was the director of football operations, and so he was the one who was sort of ushering Tommy around. I think Tommy went home and then came back for the press conference, and Truck had the Mustang and was waiting outside after the press conference to whisk him away to take him back home. So, that was an interesting day. It's you said I don't think anybody envisioned this. The thing is, back then, I don't think people envisioned 10-win seasons on a regular basis, because back then, they could not get to 10 wins. They lost to Boston College at home in 2007 when the Atlantic Division was on the line. Of course, plenty of big, huge losses before that. And so I guess what I'm saying is, as Dabo sat there at the podium that day, the question people were asking wasn't, can he lead this team to a national championship? It was, can he get this team back to where they were in the 80s, which was, yes, they won a national championship, but the main thing was getting to 10 wins, winning the ACC. That was sort of the pie in the sky, I guess.
Just getting to the ACC title game.
Yeah.
Just winning your division. It was, and I remember when I got here that Jeff Hart, he said this to me, no kidding. He said on some level, sometimes I think that Clemson winning that national championship was the worst thing that ever happened to them. which is a strange statement. But I think people were just so hungry just to get to just to start making that climb. And for good reason. I think this about my own alma mater. I went to Southwest Missouri State, now Missouri State University. We are a basketball school. And it frustrates the fire out of me that we have not made the NCAA tournament in 20 years. And the reason that I get mad is because if we're going to be a basketball school, let's be one. And I think Clemson fans kind of got that way with their football program. Like, we are a football school. This is what ultimately defines us. And to have a program that at the time was, I guess, mediocre at best. I mean, that wasn't enough, and it shouldn't have been enough. I mean, even at that time, I thought this is a program that should consistently be in the top 25. And boy, it sure didn't take long to get there.
Well, the main thing was not necessarily losing to, getting curb stomped by an ascendant Alabama program under Nick Saban. The biggest thing was losing to Boston College, to Wake Forest, to Maryland. And Tommy Bowden actually said that last week. He was on the podcast. And actually, I sort of, I don't want to say gave him a potential out, but I just made note of the fact that Dabo is in a different galaxy in terms of the commitment to football that is extended by the administration, in terms of, Dabo land and top dollar for assistant coaches. Back then, I mean, they were last in the ACC in facility spending for several years in a row early in Tommy's tenure. But to his credit, I think, Tommy said, you know what? That's no excuse. You can't lose to Wake Forest and Boston College and Maryland. That's all on me, which, again, I think is a credit to him for saying that all these years later.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, he's a great example of you have to split the man from his performance that last season. I mean, I've talked to Tommy Bowden, and it's been a while, certainly not as recently as you have, but I mean, Tommy was always a great guy, and always a pleasure to deal with. And it just kind of all fell apart in that 2008 season, and especially with so much expectation. I believe they were ranked 9th going into the season. Yes. I think that's correct.
Yes.
And it was, it just kind of fell apart. And like I said, that game at Wake Forest was just, I mean, I think 13-7 was the final score, and it was just not fun to watch. And, a funny story about that game was, I was shooting that game from the top of the Wake Forest press box, and there you kind of walk out of a door, and the press box is, your left side's kind of blocked by the press box. You can still see the entire field with the camera. I did not know that they were doing a flyover that night with, I believe, what are Apache helicopters. So I did not see them coming. And then all of a sudden there are like 4 Apache attack helicopters, like right in front of my face. And it scared the daylights out of me. So that's one of the other, that's pretty much the only good memory of that night was just kind of this funny moment of me going, holy hell, where did those things come from?
Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid 130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com. Over the 10 or so months we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. Mark, our jobs, and when I say our, like sports writer versus sports broadcaster, could not be more different. I mean, we've talked about how collegial at least the Clemson beat is, with everybody pretty much being friends and being social during, I guess after hours or whatever at bowl games and such. But like I go to a game, sit around, talk, eat, watch the game, and then after the game, I spend 30 or 40 minutes writing my take on the game, and then I leave. And that's all I have to think about. And so in some respects, on some days, you feel like you're stealing money, honestly. Whereas you guys, I've always thought, man, those guys are working. Can you enlighten everyone out there on, okay, what is the let's take it beyond just game days on Saturdays, but also Fridays leading into game days, because you guys are out there slaving away covering high school football most of the time, right?
Yeah, and I think that was part of the tough thing here was that, you know, we still had Fridays. So you guys, you know, I think a lot of you guys, you know, you would maybe travel to the game the day before. We never did that. So, I mean, just as an example, I can remember covering high school football, getting up the next morning at 9 a.m. and driving to Gainesville, Florida for a 7:00 kickoff in the swamp between Florida and South Carolina, covering the game, finishing everything up, editing in the car, and driving all the way home. It was a 23-hour shift. And just so that people know, I think a lot of times they see sports people on TV and they go, oh, well, they just stand there in front of the camera and talk. And no, most of the time we are running the camera. So if anybody who saw me at a game, I'm running up and down the sidelines with a 25, 30-pound camera on my shoulder. Doesn't matter how hot, how wet, how cold. And then you still got to do all the on-TV stuff afterwards. So it is hard work. I mean, and it is not for everybody. I used to tell people all the time, there are about 8,000 steps to covering a college football game the right way, and they all have to be done in order. And it was a lot. And one of the things I always gave a lot of credit to the people on the Clemson beat about, and this did not happen at South Carolina or Georgia or anywhere else, but the writers for Clemson, I think, always really understood the TV people and understood that we're going to ask our 3 or 4 questions. And if you just let us get in there and, you know, directly in front of somebody where we need to be, we'll be out of your hair in about 2 minutes and you can do whatever you want. But I always liked the fact from the Clemson beat, and like I said, it was not like this at South Carolina. That's no knock on any of the people down there. It's just facts are facts. But there was a lot of mutual respect, I think, and the fact that we were all so friendly with each other, I think, made everybody's lives a little bit easier. But I always appreciated it because, I mean, after I've had a camera on my shoulder for 4 hours in 95-degree heat, it's like, can you just let me get a good spot on this interview and I will be out of your hair in a minute and a half.
So I'm not asking you to call anybody out, but what was it like on the South Carolina beat dealing with what you referred to, what you alluded to?
Yeah, so I've never understood why somebody who has a voice recorder needs to stand directly in front of somebody, and that's what you would have, and that at Clemson that didn't happen, you know. But at places like South Carolina it would, and I just never understood. It's like, I mean, clearly I've got a video camera. I need a shot of this guy's face. That's the only way this works. And so it was always odd to me that somebody who could have easily stood to the side and held that recorder didn't just stand to the side and kind of let those people get there. Also, TV people need a lot less quote wise. So why not just let me get my stuff and I'll get out of your way and I'll get out of your hair and you guys can ask the more detailed, intricate questions that are never going to get on TV. So it was always bizarre to me, but at Clemson, it was always awesome because, you know, people like you, I mean, I could walk up and kind of tap you on the shoulder and you knew what that meant. It means, you know, it meant Mark just needs 6 inches of space. Like if you could just shuffle just 6 inches to your left, you know, it would really help me out. And that's kind of what the Clemson beat was. And I always appreciated it because it was just, I think it was a bigger help than what most of the writers really realize.
The only thing that bothers me sometimes is when the TV folks like literally shove me out of the way without even like, I mean, you tap on the shoulder, it's fine. Sometimes it gets physical and it's like, man, at least like ask or something, you know? I don't know. It's kind of. Yeah,
well, and I think it got worse. I mean, as Clemson got better, there were more people there. And so it got worse. And some of the people weren't, you know, they were coming from, you know, Augusta, Georgia to come cover the Tigers because they were such a big deal. And so when it got outside of what was truly local, I it did probably get a little bit more physical, but I just always figured that if I respected everybody, they would respect me, and always knew too that everybody needs a little bit of help every once in a while. So pissing people off does not help you, because ultimately that person's going to be standing in your shot. And now what motivation do they have to get to help you out and move out of your way? So like I said, I think it got worse. I mean, there would be times, about 2016, 2017, where I would look around, and I probably said this to you a couple of times, and I'd be like, where in the hell did all these people come from? Like, who are they? I don't see them during the week. I don't see them on Tuesdays at Dabo's presser. And now we've got 19,000. Who are these people? So it just got, I mean, and that's what happens. I mean, when you have an elite program, you just have more and more and more and more and more. And really that was, I think, to the detriment to the people who had been there, from the beginning of this rise, because we all knew each other. And then you look around and I know I said it to you at least once or twice. You just look around and be like, where the hell did all these people, like, where did they come from? So,
it's more than just people from Augusta and such. I mean, one of the problems, and I've beat my head against the wall about this, is they'll credential anybody. So if you're a fan out there and you want to get closer to your heroes and get free tickets, just apply for credentials to Clemson football games, because at least I guess until recently they haven't had a whole lot of safeguards.
Yeah, and I wondered if they'd ever do anything about that, because it just granted, they were getting more coverage, and that's probably not a bad thing, but I think it also affected the quality of coverage that they were getting from the people who had covered them for, 10, 15, 20 years, because, the access was simply limited by the number of people that were there. But that's, I think, something that comes from success, and it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, because the team is getting more coverage on more platforms, which is great for Clemson. But it was annoying at times, I won't lie.
Okay, my publishing schedule is dictated by when the game is over and then when I can finish writing something. Your, I guess, publishing's not the word, broadcast schedule is dictated by the nightly newscast, correct? Is it 6 o'clock and then 11 o'clock, right?
So it's interesting. It was actually dictated more by kickoff. So, for example, if we knew that if we had a noon kickoff in Death Valley, okay, well, we're working towards a 6 o'clock newscast. Game will be over at 3. Collect all your stuff by 4. That gives you about hour and a half to get your stuff cut and get it sent in. If we had an 8 o'clock kickoff in Death Valley, there's no way you're making the 11 o'clock news. So now you're working for the morning show. So now you've got all night to get it done. So very much dictated by the actual kickoff of the game, and the nightmare for us. And so let's just go through this. So if it's a noon kickoff, no problems. You're making the 6, you're making the 6 o'clock news, you're making the 11 o'clock news. 3:30 kickoff, you're going to miss the 6 o'clock, so you're just working towards 11. If you have a 7 o'clock kickoff, things are going to be a little bit dicey for the 11. You're going to get highlights on, but you're not going to get any sound bites on. So that stuff is all saved for the morning. And if it's 8 o'clock, you're just working for the morning, because the game won't be over and you can't show anything. So for us, it was always dictated, not by the time the game, I guess ultimately by the time the game ended, but we knew when they announced kickoff times what our deadline was, which I think is probably interesting and probably news to people.
All right, so I want to know just a general estimate of the time that you get home in Greenville, or I should make this past tense because you're no longer doing it, but the time you got home for after covering a noon game, after covering a 3:30 game, 7 o'clock game, 8 o'clock game, and assuming that it's a home game.
Yeah, so if it was a home game at Clemson, or really South Carolina, and this may be odd to people, but because the roads into Clemson are so small, there are often times if both of them had a noon kickoff, I could cover a South Carolina game faster than I could cover a Clemson game, just because of drive time. But for the purposes of this, noon game at Death Valley, I'm probably getting home around 8 o'clock. And if it's a 3:30, I'm probably getting home midnight or 12:30. 7 or 8 o'clock game, probably 2 or 3 in the morning, more than likely. So, because you just have work that you have to do, and you got to deal with the traffic and everything else. So, they were long days. I mean, I would be in Clemson for a noon kickoff. I'd be in Clemson at 10:30 in the morning. That's a 9.5 or 10-hour day, and they only got longer from there. And like I said, the longest shift I ever worked was that road game down in Gainesville, where Jeff Hart and I pulled a 23-hour shift because both of us wanted to be home on Sunday. So we just drove overnight. And yeah, so it kind of varied, but they were long days and physical days, and a lot of times very, very hot because, here, most of the season, it's still pretty warm outside.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was to talk about just changes in the sports broadcasting industry over, I guess, the last decade. Obviously, I know a lot about the changes in the newspaper industry and all that, and the sports writing, not as much about your previous industry. Obviously, Sports Center had a pretty big impact on the nightly newscast. Can you enlighten on that? Sort of help understand maybe some nuances to that and what things are like now.
Yeah, I think Sports Center affected a lot of the bigger markets more than they affected the markets that I worked in. Simply because when I got here in 2008, Sports Center wasn't doing a whole lot with Clemson. And if you wanted that local coverage, you had to come to the newspaper, you had to come to the local television station. With the rise of things like ESPN3, it's changed a lot because now everybody can watch every game. That wasn't the case when I can remember games in 2008 that Clemson played that were not on television. So it changed quite a bit from that standpoint. I think what changed for me over time was just the way I was taught. I was taught to be a reporter. I'm not a big predictor. I mean, I might talk with you before the game, just chit-chatting about what we think will happen, or what do you think the final score will be, or things like that. But I never did much of that on TV because I just didn't think it was necessary. First of all, there's no percentage in it, at least from a TV standpoint, because if I'm right, I'm supposed to be right. It's my job. If I'm wrong, people are saying, well, why didn't you know this? So it never felt good to me. And, when you make those predictions, and this is a great example, Clemson in the Orange Bowl against West Virginia, who saw that coming? If you're doing a pregame show and you say, oh, I think Clemson's going to win, there's no percentage in it. I mean, then they get boat raced. So I was never comfortable doing that stuff. And I think now that's what a lot of people want. But I never saw it as my job. My job was to report what was going on, point out things that maybe other people just didn't see. And really, my focus was always to, everybody can't go to every game, especially when, a national championship ticket in Tampa is going for $1,400. So my goal was always to do what I could to bring people with us. And I think for me, that was a better focus because those are the times where I can work in things about, what it feels like to be there, when those, incredible magic moments happen, or where I was standing when Hunter Renfrow, caught the touchdown pass to win the national title. Those are the things that people don't get to see, and they add, to me, that extra layer to the coverage. And that's what I was always interested in.
When I write, I sort of think of, okay, who am I writing for? Like my intended audience. I grew up watching the 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock sportscast, but full disclosure, I can't tell you the last time I watched one. Who did you think your, audience was, or intended demographic that you were telling those stories to and bringing to these big events?
Yeah, I always just kind of thought, especially, here especially, it was my neighbors. It was that's who it was, because, I'd have a guy living on one side of me that was a massive Clemson fan. The guy on the other side's a South Carolina fan. When I was living in an apartment, the guy below me is a Georgia fan. So to me, it was about, bringing it to, the people that I interacted with every single day. The people that I saw at the stadium, the people that I passed on my way, who were tailgating on the way in, and trying to bring them something that they weren't going to see anywhere else. And, I know that people very rarely believe this, but I think my sportscast showed the track record. I just always believed in, Clemson and South Carolina have a ton of fans in the upstate. And so I always tried to provide a little bit of balance between those two, because we legitimately covered both of them. Had we had more people, I always wanted to see us cover Georgia more, because there are a ton of Georgia fans in the upstate. So I just always tried to bring that balance with those three big schools, and then work in. Obviously, we've got a number of other schools like Furman and Wofford that have passionate fan bases, but ultimately, you've got to start with those big three. And usually I started with the one that had the biggest game. If Georgia and South Carolina are playing and Clemson's playing the Citadel, Georgia and South Carolina's going first. It's a game with more impact. And that wasn't a slight on Clemson fans or the fact that they were playing an FCS school. It's just, to me, that's the lead. So I tried to be as democratic as I could be with it. That gets very, very difficult when one school starts well outpacing the other. And that's kind of how it was towards the end.
You're talking about the division of coverage as Clemson got really, really, really good and South Carolina declined. Is that, how much does that, I guess, play a role in hey, we're going to have to devote our resources way more to this than that?
Well, I think where it gets out of balance, and this honestly happened with South Carolina as well, a couple of different times, is that when you get kind of into a championship season, be it football, basketball, baseball, and you have one school that still has a team that's in it, still playing, you can't provide any balance there. There's just no option. So this happened with South Carolina in 2011 and 2012, not so much 2010 because Clemson was in the College World Series with them. But in 2011, 2012, South Carolina's making these deep runs into the College World Series. There's no Clemson sports going on. It's hard to provide balance. That happened again with them, when both the men and women ended up making the Final Four. Of course, the women won the national title. And then it flipped, when Clemson started making the college football playoff, South Carolina's not playing. So there's no option for balance at that point. But I always did appreciate the fact that for a long time, for the first, I guess, 9 years that I worked here, we were the only television station in the upstate that consistently sent somebody to Clemson and to South Carolina every single week. And most of the road games as well. Some of them were far enough away. Like I never went to Boston because we had high school football the night before. We just couldn't get there. So I was always proud of that fact, that we provided that. We, for years, I went to Steve Spurrier's Tuesday presser. Mike Giordano went to, Dabo Sweeney's Tuesday presser, and we had reports from both places, and we were the only station in the upstate that was providing that sort of coverage, and I was always very proud of that.
How big was the sports staff when you got there, and how big is it now?
When I got there, we had 3 official sports people, and we could pull in photographers, if we needed and if they were available. And then when I can only speak about when I left. When I left, we had 2 people.
Okay. And how, as far as the whole of time that they devote to the sportscast each night, not specific to YFF, but just in general, how much has that, I guess, been constricted? Like, let's say over the last 15 years, in your estimation.
It's been constricted quite a bit, and to their credit, WYFF was not really one of those stations, because I can remember working the weekends, and I'd get 6.5 minutes at 11 o'clock. And just to give you some sort of comparison, when I worked in Texas, I got 3. Didn't matter what was going on, didn't matter how big it was. WYFF was always a station that believed in sports. So we got quite a bit of time, especially on the weekends, especially during college football. So I was always very thankful for that, that we mattered. And in a lot of stations, you don't. I mean, the place that I worked in Texas, I can remember having consultants come in and literally tell me to my face, we don't care about sports, which was dumbfounding to me because high school, when you've got, on any given Friday night in that area, you had almost 500,000 people going to see a high school football game. And you're standing here telling me that people don't care about sports. So the landscape has changed. It certainly depends on the market that you're in, sort of how they handle it. But the way I always looked at it, and granted I was a sports guy, so I looked at it probably differently, but so many stations brand themselves as like complete coverage. Well, that includes sports, because that's so much a part of the fabric of our society, especially in the South. There are some places that care a little less about sports, and so they don't have as many people. But for the most part, sports are woven into what we do. All you have to do is look at the numbers for the NFL. Like the top 10 television programs last year were all NFL football games. So people care. And that's even with the NFL having taken a couple of black eyes here and there. To me, it was always about, if you're going to say that you're going to provide complete coverage and that you're local, then that includes your sports teams and it includes your sports people. But a lot of stations now don't see it that way. And maybe it's a cost cutting measure. I don't know. But I felt very lucky to be able to kind of pursue my dream, because if you think about it, in the upstate, there are 6 jobs, and the jobs were hard to get. They were highly coveted. And you don't work at a bank. There's probably a bank 2 blocks from my office that's probably hiring 6 people right now. So that's kind of the difference. And but I was very lucky. I worked in 2 very good markets at 2 very good stations. And I was very thankful for that. And it's why I didn't bounce around. A lot of people do. They'll spend 2 years here and 2 years there. I loved covering sports in the upstate. So once I got here, and realized that the weather's fantastic and the golf is great and the sports are even better, what more do I need?
What constitutes a bad night for a sportscaster when you walk away from the station or a stadium going, man, that sucked? And what constitutes a really good night when you walk away going, man, we nailed it?
Yeah, I had a lot of those nailed it nights with Brad Freilich. We were on the road together so much, and excuse me, it's a little bit hard to define, but I could just feel it. Like I could feel when my energy was right. I could feel when I got my words right. And, and if we were live, that's not, we don't, live in local television doesn't mean a teleprompter. It means you're live, and that stuff is not memorized. It's, you just have to talk and you have to bring that energy. And for me, that's what it was all about, was really bringing that energy, knowing that we put a great product on the air and that it had all the bells and whistles. And, but those were the great moments where, doing an hour-long live special before a national championship game and looking at Brad Freilich afterwards and going, we can't do it better than that. Mm. That's pretty intoxicating, and that'll get your juices going a little bit. And then I don't know if it's the sad part. It's just the reality of it is, you get done with that hour-long special, you killed it, and the work really hasn't even begun because the game hasn't started. So you still have a long night ahead of you, regardless of what happens. So, but for me, I could just always feel it. I knew when it was dead on. I knew when it wasn't good. But it's one of those things. The guy who mentored me, he always told me, he's like, Mark, it's live TV. Either way, it's gone. It's just gone. So, and you just go back out there and try and get them the next time. But for me, it was always about energy and bringing those things that that people just didn't know about. For example, Clemson loses to Alabama in the national title game in Arizona, and I get the stuff I need on the field, and I walk off the field and walk into the tunnel, and the first person I see is Kathleen Sweeney with their youngest son is Clay, right? I think I've got that right.
Yes.
Yeah. So with Clay, just basically attached to her leg, and Clay is bawling his eyes out. I mean, you can tell he is really disappointed. And I'll never forget Kathleen looking at me, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, Mark. Next year we'll have a Heisman Trophy winner and a national championship."
Wow.
And she should have been right on both accounts. Let's be real honest.
Yes.
She was right on the bigger one, on the national title. But those were the things I loved because I was the only person who was there for that moment. It's not on TV. It's not recorded. So I'm the only person who can tell that story. And that's pretty awesome.
That's cool. Did you remind her of that a year later?
I did, actually. So, and she kind of just looked at me, and I'm sure she had long since forgotten it, but she probably hadn't forgotten about Clay crying. And folks, please keep in mind, Clay was like, probably 9 years old, something like that. So, but yeah, it's just, I mean, those were the moments I loved because that's the stuff I could put on TV that nobody else had. And granted, I didn't have video for it, but you didn't need it. It's an organic story that just happened. And like I said, there was really nobody else within probably 10 or 15 feet of us, which is really strange considering who she is. That there was just that moment. And that's, of all the things that I did and all the things that I saw, it is easily in the top 10 because it was just that moment. And like I said, she should have been right on both accounts. Deshaun Watson probably should have won the Heisman Trophy. They did win the national championship, but I was the only one there who heard that.
If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit Card Processing Company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com. Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183 or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. What's number one in your top 10 of moments you witnessed?
Oh, gosh. It happened the next year, and it wasn't even... It was sports related, but it wasn't. I got done with my stuff on the field. Clemson had just won the national championship, and I am racing to get out to the TV tower because Brad Freilich is by himself, anchoring live coverage. And I mean, he needs somebody else with him, he didn't need it, but I mean, that's a lot to do by yourself. So I'm kind of racing out of the stadium, and I just remember all these Clemson fans around. They're so happy. And somebody shouted at me. They said, "Hey, Marc Dopher, did you see that?" And I just turned around and I went, "I'm here," because it's just so funny. But I think it was that moment that just they saw that, they knew it was possible. But 2 years in a row they went toe to toe with Alabama, and to win it in that fashion. Not to take anything away from a blowout win over Alabama, but Tampa was electric, and that was a really cool moment, and something I'll never forget. And it's odd; it didn't even happen on the field; it just happened on the concourse.
Where were you when Renfro caught that ball?
And this is kind of crappy, honestly. So to get on the field, you basically have to go underneath the stadium and group up, kind of in this pool of reporters and cameras and everything. So Ricardo LeCompte and I actually watched it on television because they had some TVs around, because we're getting ready to go on the field, and you're just kind of waiting to be released. So that part of it was kind of crappy, to be in the stands for the, to be in the press area for the entire game and then have to go and be underneath the stadium. You hear this cheer, but you don't know what's happened. And then you see it on TV. And I just remember looking at Ricardo and I just said, oh my God, they won the national championship. I thought it was possible, but until it happens, it just doesn't settle in. But yeah, I was underneath the stadium, unfortunately.
So what are the rules for the rights holding restrictions? Like, you can't, like, local stations can't shoot video of you can only shoot a certain amount of video. How does that work?
So you're not allowed to shoot the game in the college football playoff. Local stations are not allowed to shoot the game. You can shoot stuff afterwards. So the focus was always on after, because if they win, the only video that you have that belongs to you is the stuff that you shoot of the celebration, the trophy, the confetti. So you just leave the camera on record, because that's all you're ever going to have. You've got that moment, and that's all it's ever going to be. So that was kind of the focus. And I always thought it was, technically they say that you can't use the national championship footage within 72 hours of the game being over. Well, how are you going to do that? Clemson won the national title. It makes no sense. I mean, you don't want me to shoot it, that's fine. But to say that I can't use the video afterwards is absurd, because I mean, the Hunter Renfrow play, you got to show it. I mean, we never got, to my knowledge, we never got fined for using it because we used it a ton. But, we'd courtesy ESPN and the CFP. But, I mean, how are you supposed to do that? You're telling me I'm not supposed to run any game video from a national championship performance? I mean, that makes no sense.
Were there stations that didn't show it?
I don't think so. It's one of those things that you do it and you kind of see where the chips fall afterwards. Nobody ever said anything. Maybe they knew it was ridiculous, but there are constraints on broadcast, and I understand not running highlights while the game is in progress, because ESPN paid a lot of money to show that game, but afterwards, especially if I'm giving credit to ESPN, we should be able to show that, especially because you didn't let us shoot it. I mean, if you let us shoot it, we'll run our own video. Much rather run my video with no graphics on it. But yeah, so that's just one of those things that you kind of beat your head against the wall, but it kind of is what it is.
So non-playoff games, are there any restrictions for what you shoot and broadcast?
Not really. If it's a game at Death Valley, you can shoot the whole game and shoot the pregame and, shoot the fans rushing on the field afterwards. And so there really weren't many restrictions, which was great for us, because especially early in the season, you want video of every guy you can get. And the reason for that is that at some point, for example, a coach is going to move on. He's going to get the, offensive coordinator job at Vanderbilt. Well, I need a shot of him. So the early part of the season, the focus was not only on shooting the games, but it was getting video of every single coach, getting video of sometimes some backups. That's what the spring game was really good for, was that you could get video of a lot of different guys actually playing football, not just running around in shorts and T-shirts at practice. And then as the season went on, certainly if Deshaun Watson threw a touchdown, you wanted to have that. But a 5-yard run by Deshaun Watson is not something that I would keep at the end of the season, because you're never going to use it again. If he gets hurt, different deal. But if it's just a 5-yard run and he gets up and goes back to the huddle, you don't need to keep that, because it's just never going to see the light of day.
I always kind of laugh when I hear both Clemson fans and South Carolina fans call each other inbred rednecks. This is a state of 4 or 5 million people, so it's kind of we're all the same people pretty much. You're objective on this because you came from outside. Yeah. Is there any difference between Clemson fans and South Carolina fans in general?
I don't think so. I really don't. And it took me a while to kind of develop this, and I really do believe it, because I know a number of fans on both sides of the aisle. But I think, and honestly, you could probably extend this a little bit to politics as well. I won't get into that here. But the thing that I kind of discovered over time is that every fan base has kind of this 5% that is, they're louder than everybody else, and their hatred runs a little deeper. And but because they're louder, people start to associate the entire fan base with that 5%. And that's that's really not who they are. I know some, and I know that there are people out there that will go, "Oh, a true Clemson fan would never pull for South Carolina." But I know Clemson fans that were like, you know what, good for South Carolina. They knocked off number 1 Alabama, in 2010, or that they could pull for Marcus Lattimore because he was a good guy, or that they could, or South Carolina fans who, they're tired of getting beat by Dabo, but they can look you in the face and go, gosh, I know he's a good guy. So I think the Fringe Five kind of muddies the water a little bit. That's my opinion. And like I said, this comes from knowing people on both sides of the aisle. Rivalry week you can set aside and as a different thing. But it is surprising because when I was in Texas, all Texas and Texas A&M fans wanted was those two teams to be undefeated heading into Thanksgiving and playing as the top 2 teams in the country. And here that doesn't seem to be the case. And I've always thought it was odd because how good would that be?
Wait a minute. You're saying Texas A&M fans wished that Texas would win all of its games and vice versa just so they could be undefeated?
They wanted that. They wanted to show down for that number 1 spot in the country. It was that's what they wanted. They really did. I think, I don't know if it's a bulk of the fan base, but most of the people that I knew, though, because their thing was, how awesome would that night be? And imagine this, regardless of whether you're a Clemson fan or South Carolina fan, imagine the fever pitch in this state if both of those teams are 11-0, ranked number 1 and number 2 in the country, headed in to Williams-Brice Stadium, 8:00 kickoff on ABC. Imagine the electricity. Imagine how hard that ticket would be to get. And I know that there are majority of fans on both sides don't want that, but what an amazing night that would be.
Well, it's the path of least resistance. It's easier for Clemson when South Carolina's bad, and vice versa. And also, you just really want to you want your rival to suffer as much as possible.
Yeah, that's true.
In every way.
But it is it was fun to be a part of, and I don't think that the rivalry gets its due. But I do think that some of that, some of that stems from, what you and I have talked about quite a bit, which was, a lot of times that the fever pitch around the rivalry, that the game didn't deliver as much fever as just the general thought of it did. But it was always fun to cover. I always looked forward to it and saw some of the funniest things I've ever, I've seen, a wife in a Clemson jersey consoling her husband in a Gamecock jersey. Fantastic shot for television. Just, yeah. And what makes it so special, and I think Auburn and Alabama, part of what makes it special, but it's certainly true here as well, is that, how many houses divided do you know? A ton. Mm-hmm. There are so many of them, and neighbor versus neighbor. It's an awesome thing. And we got to see both teams ranked in the top 10 playing that game. And it made it more fun. And granted, I am not from the state of South Carolina. I do not root for either of those teams. So I have a different perspective, but like I said, imagine that Saturday after Thanksgiving, 11-0 versus 11-0, number 1 versus number 2, night game in Death Valley. Goodness gracious. It would just be a fever pitch.
Was it a little weird for you, at least watching this past year's national championship game from the couch?
It wasn't. It's, and I had so many people ask me that they're like, well, now that Clemson's the national championship game, do you kind of miss it? And I really didn't. I am very, very proud of the fact that I was here and covered intimately the rise of this program. I was there the night that ultimately got Tommy Bowden fired. I was there the day that Dabo Swinney was hired as the interim. I was there the day he was hired as the head coach. I was there when they lost the national championship. I was there when they won. That's good enough for me. To see all those great players come through, to have that feeling of watching Taj Boyd play and thinking to myself, regardless of his record against South Carolina, my thought was, oh my gosh, it's going to take Clemson forever to find another quarterback who does this much for this program. And then here comes Deshaun Watson, and having the same thought when he left. Oh my gosh, can they find a guy who's going to be as good as him? I mean, it's a once in a generation. Here comes Trevor Lawrence. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that I got to witness all those moments, that I got to cover them for people in the upstate. And that's enough.
How many national championships does Clemson win in the next 5 years? What's the over under? Hello?
3.
You there, Mark?
3 in the next 5.
What'd you say, 3? Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 3. I think 3 is a great over-under number. Didn't pick it just because it's right in the middle, but I think just realistically with, we know that injuries can happen and things like that. But, 3 national championships. Now, your listeners need to keep in mind, if they win three out of the next 5, I mean, over the course of in 7 or 8 year period, they will have gone from 1 national title to 6. I mean, so that's pretty good. It's the sky is the limit, and you wonder with this recruiting class that they've put together for, I guess, what is 2020. Those guys are going to have a lot to live up to, and there's going to be so much pressure. But I don't think you could have a better man at the helm to help them deal with that pressure. But you got that many 5 stars. I mean, people aren't expecting you to play, in the Peach Bowl on December 30th, unless it's part of the CFP. I mean, these people are expecting you to play in the national championship.
What ends up happening with Muschamp in South Carolina?
Wow. I don't know.
And how much does it hinge on this Clemson monster? Like, just the perception and the psyche and all that. Like, if they keep getting pounded by Clemson.
I mean, gosh, you almost feel bad for the guy because there's no end in. It just seems like there's no end in sight, for the guys in orange. But that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, and for me, anytime anybody talks about like, oh, we need a coaching change or something like, I always ask them, I'm like, well, give me 3 names of people that you are going to go get right now. And that's kind of the question. I mean, where do you go? What fixes it? I think the fact that they have upgraded their facilities is going to help them. But the problem that they've got is they've got the best team in the country in their backyard, and they know they have to play them every single year.
Marc Dopher, thank you for giving us so much of your time. Really appreciate it. Great catching up with you and getting an update on your post-broadcasting career. Best of luck to you, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody can ever pry me off my couch on a Saturday, I might end up at a Clemson game or a South Carolina game.
Stay on that couch, man. I'm slightly jealous, not a lot, but slightly. That sounds like a lot of fun.
All right, brother. You take care.
All right. Thanks to Marc Dopher for joining us, for sharing his precious time with us. Going to try to explore that angle a little further with more folks who have been in the media industry, who have made the decision to get out of it, to get in the real world, so to speak. Thanks again to Mark. Thanks again to our loyal sponsors, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm, our title sponsor, downtown Greenville, the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, a Trevor Lawrence throw from the Rock, Founders Credit Union and Matt Gross in Clemson, Uptown Realty LLC with Patrick Enzer in the PD area in the Eastern Midlands, Harris Flooring America, Merca, I guess I should say, or could say, maybe say, in Anderson, Tandem Payment in Greenville. Most of all, thanks to all of you for making this a part of your listening routine. We'll be back next week. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the week and weekend. Cheers.